Thank you for joining me for a really exciting show tonight. I'm joined by someone who, to me, is one of the closest and most important teachers I've had during my path. The famous Gerald Clark, who has written two fantastic books. The first, The Anunnaki of Nibiru, and the second book he wrote was called Seventh Planet Mercury Rising. And I highly recommend both of these books. So tonight I'm going to be sitting down with Gerald, and we're going to have a pretty deep discussion from everything from current affairs to discussing the nature of our reality in this holographic universe. So thank you so much, Gerald, for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's really good to get back together with you, Matt. I'm doing this on speaker view. Is it working right for you?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you're seeing it. Okay, for some reason it doesn't do it on my end. It's supposed to switch to what I see, but anyway. Okay, so yeah, that's some pretty heavy stuff you want to talk about.
Well, you and I always have good conversations. So tell me, Gerald, what have you been up to? Because you and I have both been extremely busy over the last 6 months.
Yeah, last contact we had, we were working a little bit on. We did the Anunnaki series together, which I think wore us both out for a year, right? Which
pretty tired after that.
Yeah, so the series has reached a lot of people though. It's kind of done pretty well. Anyway, then after that, I went off to try to learn how to do animation so I could tell the story from the first book I wrote, which was the Anunnaki of Nibiru. And I did that one in 2013, so I can't believe that's been 5 years already. And you came in and helped me some on that. We tried to get some traction and make that happen. And then we went off to other stuff. Then Kristen and I started a school for structural integration because the whole world is learning online now, and we could see that market wasn't being served. So we started what we think is one of the first full-on online structural integration schools called Gravity Body Academy, and that ended up being, I don't know, 28 videos, 34 videos later, 2 tests written in JavaScript or what is it? Yeah, JavaScript.
That's really difficult.
Online. So yeah, it was like, wow, it was a lot of work, but we finally we put that out together. So we did all that together. And so we felt really good about that, and then stepped away, took a little breather. And one thing led to another. And I'd been doing a lot of iClone stuff, as you recall, with trying to learn to do movies. Okay. And that was kind of a hobby. It was, time consuming at times, and it was very difficult to improve your skills as an animator. I mean, it takes years to get good at that. Some people are just naturals. So I messed with that as much as I got. I learned a lot of stuff, but in that process, I learned that all the characters and all the scene sets I was doing in that tool could be taken over to another tool that that was downloadable for free. And I was like, free's always good. So I started messing with the two, and next thing you know, I was working on one of the best game engines to try to produce a story involving the characters, where you introduce a little history with a little vice. Okay, and let's face it, most parents don't really like the games their kids are playing. I didn't.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Because they're too violent or whatever reason.
Exactly. So there's this whole debate over the effect or the influence of gaming, and it's a huge industry, as you know. So anyway, so I'm looking into that, and I think just as Thoth encoded his continuous creation science into the tarot cards, which he did, as in a way to preserve his knowledge through a vice, a game of cards, right? So
yeah.
So I kind of picked up on that, and I decided, because I resisted the idea of doing a game, even though many people asked me, why can't you do a game with this story? It'd be so much fun. And I wasn't really much of a gamer. I don't sit around and play video games. So the idea of me making a game is really kind of like out of left field. And I'm like, who are you to make a game? You're not even a gamer.
But you're having a lot of fun though, aren't you?
Well, it landed on my path, and I didn't see the connection. I used to do simulations almost every day, Matt, designing electronic circuits as an engineer. And a lot of it had to do with parallel events, firing and triggers. And basically, you're telling a story. You've got a sequence of events and actors that have to happen so that everything comes out right. Well, this game engine's no different. It's got blueprints that, or parallel events firing and all this kind of stuff. And so it's right up my alley. Okay. And I didn't
Yeah.
know, I didn't see that coming actually. So, so that's a lot of fun for me actually. So in very short order, within 2 months, I put that game together that I just showed you.
It was really cool. I got to see some really neat stuff. And to me, it's really interesting that someone like you, who has such a complex engineer mind, would then do something like creating a game with certain laws and rules, especially when you consider the fact that one of the things that you and I do is trying to decode what the nature of our reality is. And the more you design a game or understand the mechanics behind how complex it is, the more you realize that our own reality has certain rules and constructs that have been woven into it just like a game. So you tend to, when you do that, like you said, you get a little bit better of an understanding of even our reality itself. So what are you up to right now? You're working on some game stuff, and you're in the middle of some pretty technical things, right?
Yeah, the technical guts of it turns out, you've got all these resources that have to be stitched together into a screenplay, really. And think about back in Greece, you'd have a big cylinder that always comes back to me in my mind. They in order to do a drama play and put on the effects for the audience, somebody understood how to take actors and sequence them when the scene set. Okay, these were passive actors. We call these scene objects, static meshes in the game. Okay, but so they would wind up strings on different pegs at different locations that would represent an amount of time. Okay, with a weight on the end of it, and they'd wrap this whole thing up, and then they'd start the big weight that's turning the barrel at a certain rate. And as everything unwound, the statue in the middle would start spinning at a certain time in the scene play, in the drama play. Okay, to bring the story to life, right, like that.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing these blueprints, if you will, in the game, it reminds me so much of exactly that. It's exactly that. This actor's got to do this at this time, and he's going to do that. And, let's wind that string up right there. So it's kind of fun.
Just like all the way back then, right?
Yeah. So while I'm doing that, it's kind of a virtual reality. I oftentimes think about the game room in the movie Hunger Games, and just like you said, the idea of causing the actors well, in that movie, there's something quite disturbing I wanted to bring up in terms of how the powers that be deal with revolutions. And revolutions are led by revolutionaries who are often seen as heroes in the script. Okay, right? So what do you do with them? In Hunger Games, they had a lottery where they would bid the heroes against each other, so they would eliminate each other and not be revoltous to their different zones, districts, right?
It's the hardest thing to do, isn't it?
Right. So, in our modern reality, we have sports. Okay. And the more damage they do to each other, the more the audience seems to be there, just like in the old Colosseum in Rome. If there's no death or blood, it's not even real. Right. So they could be just acting, right? Like that. So, so now you look at the gaming industry or anything like that in terms of the stimulus that's being given as part of the bread and the stimulus in the arena in Rome, right, to keep the people under control. Well, now, so if you just generally look at our culture, and I'll give you a chance to answer this, what kind of games have been set up to destroy the heroes that would possibly be involved in revolutions? What do you see going on? I'll give you a couple right off the top of my head. What do you think? What do you see?
Well, give me an example of what you mean by that.
Well, for instance, a hero going up against another hero to kill him. Isn't that what happens in wars? You take your young. Yeah. Okay. And another way to do damage to him without actually not even killing him, but also getting the blood in the arena. What about the modern day sport of UFC? It's one of the most popular things on the planet right now, right? So those heroes are damaging the other heroes. They're not expending that energy in revolutions against the powers that be, right? So
and if we get past the silliness of war someday in the future, then realize that we have these artificial borders in most cases with governments that are pitting people against each other in many cases for reasons and motives that aren't even real, or they're created just to fuel the military industrial complex or a lot of these different things. And like you said, just instead of having people come together and stand up and move forward with some kind of a revolution or whatever, they just have them fight each other and then just keep being stuck in the same loop over and over again. I see that. It's almost like keeping us distracted by our own, the silliness of our own realities with the small things and not see the bigger picture of what we could be part of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, that place right there, it must have a near and dear place to my heart, because I was one of those that spent 7 years in the military serving what I thought was an honorable cause and all that. And when you wake up to the reality of what you really subjected yourself to under that belief system, it's kind of scary. So
it is, and you realize you were a part of it, right? Mm-hmm. You see, I was a part of the very system that I loathe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I, of course, that's not to show any disrespect to anyone who's served and been in the military, but when you start to see the bigger picture of what we're actually doing, you know, when people are, you know, invading a country like Afghanistan and we're pretending it's about terror, and yet at the same time soldiers are, you know, walking through poppy fields and defending for the pharmaceutical industries and the oil tycoons and all these different things, you get to see that we're just being used as this disposable means to accomplish whatever goals some of these powerful, you know, elites want for outcomes, right?
Yeah. So,
So Gerald, I wanted to go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, I wanted to move from that point to just talk about some of these weird current events that are going on right now around the world. Like, like for instance, just recently we had that strange situation where we had sunspot observatories, especially the one in New Mexico, but also other ones around the world that were being closed at the same time, and with very little explanation for why that was the case. They would just evacuate entire areas. And to me, and one of the most common questions that people had was, what do they not want us to see around the sun? And what do they not want people to have access to? Do you have any thoughts on that, Gerald?
Well, of course, you know, way back when we started talking about the Anunnaki of Nibiru and whether their home planet was real, I kind of calculated back of the envelope based on what some scientists had given us when we thought, well, there's some envelope windows when if what they say was true and the parameters didn't change too significantly from when they gave it to us. This is back in '91. We'd expect to see that thing from here anywhere from, gosh, it was a big window from July 2015 till what I calculated be the end of 2019. But that's just to perihelion. That wasn't for the planet Nibiru to come past the solar ecliptic on its way outbound, because that's when it's dragging all its debris. It could come between you and the sun or the galactic center or whatever. So the positioning right then is really important. So I didn't really think that much about it until I started watching all the Earth change happening, and everybody was still talking about it, even since, gosh, this was May of 2015, Matt, that I wrote the first calculations to go, well, where is Nibiru now? And, you know, the best evidence that we had. And when I started seeing the Earth changes and happening, I was like, well, this is an outside influence, and it's pretty obvious. So it's either approaching the galactic center that's stirring us up so bad, or it's an outside intruder body, or it's both.
Probably a combination of a lot of different factors, right?
Because I always thought that, well, why did their planet and their sun get trapped into our galactic, and into our orbit, into our galaxy, because it was in another galaxy? Why did that happen? Would they get too close? Were they crossing the galactic center about the same time, and during that disturbance, one got pulled off the other? So I really see the wobble through the galactic centers of a neighboring galaxy very much being possibly part of, okay, this actor is now part of this solar system, that one goes over there, when these events happen. There's maybe collisions too. The billiard balls get stirred up. So I think that's very much part of the Enuma Elish story in and of itself. So
it seems to make total sense, especially when you consider.
So it gives you two avenues to go down. You could go down the avenue of Nibiru returning, and there's a big community that's been watching that, and you know it and I know it, okay, including all the observatories. Or you could go down the pathway simultaneously of well, did nothing really happen in 2012 after the mind said that we were entering a new sun and now we're focused on the sun? Okay, how are those correlated, right? So I thought about that as well, and I've looked at that from
Yeah, I mean,
both
you get
angles.
these different time periods of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, everybody's now
And I
aware
find it
of that.
fascinating. I know, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's fascinating that when we look at the fact that a lot of people are talking about how the sun could be moving towards a grand solar minimum, which is a really significant deal, because you would get significant changes in the climate and in the transition of that sun body to that grand solar minimum. You would get things like what we see right now, which is excessive heat and a lot of the anomalies that are happening around the world. But like you said, I absolutely don't think it's just the sun. I think there's a lot of other factors involved. We just had an article yesterday that came out online talking about how they have this planet called Goblin, which is this really small little ice planet that has this very strange elliptical orbit that, just like all these other bodies that are in the outside of our solar system, they're being affected by something further out. Something is causing them to have very unusual orbits. And again, Planet X was brought up just yesterday in that article as being responsible for it. And to me, it makes a lot of sense that we couldn't know about this, because of the fact that we just discovered the Oort cloud and the Kuiper belt recently. Within 10, 15 years, we just discovered these incredibly important aspects of our outer solar system that we didn't even know about before. And so we had no way to even incorporate some of these factors into why these orbital bodies are acting the way they are, or a lot of these strange anomalies. So to me, I think that there's three factors going on, and you brought up them. I think that as we're entering the galactic center, it's part of this whole churning up energy. I think that the sun is moving into a grand solar minimum, which is another factor in all of this. And I think that Planet X, as it's passing through, its effect on all the other planets, and the wobbling and the strange anomalies we're seeing, I think that all these factors are involved in what we're seeing are dramatic earth changes happening all around the world. We are seeing record number of volcanoes going off and tsunamis. That we just look at what just happened within this last week in Indonesia. They had a massive earthquake, a tsunami, and then a volcano just went off in the same location within a week. And that's happening all around the world, especially locations that are found on these faults and the Ring of Fire and all these locations. So the real question is, what is this leading up to? What is this escalating towards? And, is it going to get a lot worse? And what can we expect? And I know, and we're not going to, of course, I don't want to turn this into any kind of a fear-based mongering, but I think it is important that people have facts and information and understand that, something could happen, and we should at least be prepared to not have electricity for a lengthy amount of time, or a number of these small things that can have major impacts on our reality. Do you know what I mean, Gerald?
Yeah, well, everybody can read the recommendations from emergency management agencies of their country and go, what is the recommended, set of things to have and how long to, survive. So I'm not in that business. I'm not into that game, but it is a prudence, anytime circumstances are changing. I don't care if it's due to war or environment or whatever, you should at least have some sort of modicum of not being a burden to someone else and being able to take care of yourself and help your neighbors if you can. So
absolutely. And that's a great point. We should be helping each other rather than just ignoring and pretending that our neighbors are just some person that we don't care about, and we go about our lives pretending we're alone and we're on our own, when I really think that it would be to all of our benefits if we start coming together more as a community and helping each other out. I know that sometimes I'm at fault for that too, but we should be a lot more friendly and be a lot more connected with each other rather than be so divided, because of course that's how this whole reality and system has been set up, for division rather than unity. It's
right.
Like you said, instead of revolution happening, we have the complete opposite. We just have this constant competition, basically, in our reality.
Yeah. So Interestingly enough, back, I don't know, when I was looking into this topic about the solar observatories and the countdown calendar from Thoth down to, what did it start, August 14th or August 11th, 3014 BCE? And it counted down approximately 5,200 years to the next sun. And I'm being very general here, okay? Well, you know, the idea that they were counting their periods of time in terms of sun activity ought to make you look up in the sky and go, what's going on up there, right? What's this next sun all about relative to them? So I was, excuse me, I was thinking a lot about the sun. And when I was going through college, one of my professors, who was actually the head of the department at the time, was a solar system physicist. And I'll give him a shout out right now. His name was Professor Coles, and I really liked the guy. He was cool.
I would too. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I really never thought that much about the dependence of all life on the frequency spectrum that's generated, the wavelength or frequency from the sun. But it truly does. It regulates all life.
Yep.
So what happened? Let's play this little mind game. So suppose something happened to the sun where it changed its state some way. It got more fuel, got burned hotter, got less fuel, whatever. It changed its energy state. Well, what if it changed its frequency spectra too, such that it overlapped with, you know, that which all life forms share, which is the whole electromagnetic spectrum. So you can't have a change of the sun without having a change to all life.
Exactly.
Plants and animals, everything. So that being the case, well, let's stop and think about this. Obvious question. If the Mayans were categorizing periods of their calendar as suns, first sun all the way up to the fifth sun, the one that we supposedly are now experiencing as of approximately 2012. Some people argue about this. Who cares if it's plus or minus a year? It's done. Yeah. Okay, we're in that window. If that was the case, then let's suppose we put more fuel on that fire. Okay, more fuel on the sun. Well, where could that come from? The aggregation of matter happens in a narrow band that spirals around the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And we know that, we can see that. Okay, so there's a lot of debris and gas and stuff in there. Okay, so if you take this fiery burning sun and you move it through there where it gets more fuel, it could change energy states.
That's right.
And I think truly, because the Mayan calendar counted down to that event, listen, it was a countdown calendar. What are you counting down to? The end of a solar age, okay? Well, what happens then?
That's right.
Does the sun go through a big transformation as it passes through the galactic center? That ought to be the next obvious question you ask yourself. What happens if all that fuel and gas that's in the galactic center hits that burning rock? Well, let's extrapolate. There's lots of things that could happen. First of all, it could stay at its current state, and and for people that don't know, there's a life cycle for a star, and the sun is considered a star. So you know, it goes from condensation, aggregating matter, to establishing density in its mass, and if it has spin, it does a little different things than when it doesn't, you know. And ultimately, as it takes on mass, that density somehow creates such pressure that we could end up with a molten core. And many planets have this. Okay. Well, if that effectively catches fire and starts the whole thing kind of on fire, you end up with a sun. All right. Put some more fuel on there, and you could end up with a supernova, where the thing actually explodes and takes all its matter and sprays it all over the galaxy, and any billiard ball that's in the way might get hit. You know, stuff like that. So.
Or you could have a black hole develop too, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So it depends. It's the energy and matter thing, and the conversion of one to the other. It reaches homeostasis clearly, because all energy is neither created or destroyed. It only changes state. Well, it shows up as planets, it shows up as bodies, shows up as plants, and it shows up as destructive weapons you can put in actors' hands that do damage to each other, so they don't throw off the governing bodies that are keeping you from the truth. Right, and usually the truth is that
exactly
unenslaves people. So it's always the thing that you're punished the most for is talking about the truth. And you want to see if that's true? Look at the editorial oversight on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. I've had some problems with that.
You tell me one person you know that's in this business and been smacked around. with strikes and this and that and demonetized. Has it happened to you? And you do
Oh,
not.
absolutely. The freedom of speech is being attacked big
Yeah.
time.
Well, that's what happens is when time, and you can find out who doesn't want you talking about them because you'll get your mouth zipped closed through these kind of means. Okay, so when you start talking about certain things, then you can go, oh, okay, I'm really onto something here because I'm getting the zip, right? So
Yeah.
and if it's tied to your livelihood, listen. So part of the process is tethering your livelihood to the degree of truth you tell, or the degree with which you go along. I mean, let's look at China, for instance, and their social scoring system where if you get bad points, you can't even participate in banking or transportation, things like
It's
that.
pretty scary what's going on with that whole area.
All you have to do is go like this to cause that to happen. So
And that's
anyway,
that's why we need to band together instead of like truthers. This whole community online, instead of competing against one another, we have to all come together and realize we have a common goal to achieve here.
Well,
and
I think our goal today is to kind of pin down this actor, the sun, what it's doing, and what it has to do with our ancient past and the beings that affiliated themselves with planets that we know happened in the Enuma Elish. And they've done it all through history. I mean, let's go to Rome, for instance. There was Saturn, there was Jupiter, and there was Neptune, right? There was Mars. All the gods in Rome were named after the planets that the Anunnaki gods in Sumer had taken on even back then.
Yeah.
We know Enki took on Neptune. We know that Enlil had taken on Jupiter. Okay, so Jupiter in Rome was Zeus to the Greeks. Okay, so back and forth. Okay, so we know there's an affiliation with these planets. Well, the sun god one was interesting. And we talked a little bit about this one because he was kind of one of the most interesting actors. One of the actors that was playing, it looked like both sides, right? Oh, I'm going to avenge my father because he didn't get kingship, so I'm going to go land in Babylon, create a hotel for all the other gods, and my spaceport's going to go back and forth to Nibiru, and I'm going to be king. That was Marduk, right? Basically in the story. Yeah. He did that in Enlil's territory, and they went to war, right? Back and forth. So, and because Enlil had command of the territory that had the space facility. So this Marduk actor is a really key figure, being the son of Enki, his firstborn son, who was born of himself and apparently his half-sister, so that he had rights to be ruler. Okay, so he had ascension rights as what's considered a great dragon in Sumer in Egypt. Were these beings that were born of the high-level Anunnaki council members that could become the next big ruler, okay? Like the ruler of the whole earth. Yeah. Okay, you had, and two characters come to mind that, actually three that were considered great dragons. Marduk was one of them. And if you go look at his edifices in Sumer, he's shown standing with his foot on top of a Sarupu dragon. That was his symbol, was the Sarupu dragon. So you see that in Babylon, out on the gates of Babylon, that dragon was his symbol. Okay, then Ninurta, the firstborn son of Enlil, who was the warrior Ninurta, known as Apollo in Greece, he was also a great dragon. Okay, so if you read the, I think it was in Revelations about the September 23rd big event that was coming up about the birth of the child from Virgo and the dragon, was it the blah, blah, blah?
The great red dragon, yeah.
That was talking about Enlil and his wife. He had a child with Ninmah, who was the third main character actor, who was Enki and Enlil's half-sister, who was the medical officer. Well, she had a child and many children with lots of them. One of them was with Enlil, who birthed Apollo, okay? So in that story, in the Bible, he talks about him being the chosen one, right? So there's this battle between Marduk and Ninurta, but Thoth was also a great dragon, okay? So you have several of these players in here that are vying for higher level positions on the Anunnaki Council, and we're all just pawns in that game, pretty much, and always have been.
I absolutely agree with that, and that's something very heavily that I'm talking about in the new book, is this war of these chosen Anunnaki gods who want to be supreme and be the rulers of our earth. And what I've really noticed is that similar to what we considered when we were looking at the whole Titan versus Olympians way back in the day, one of the things I really think is going on now that's a big deal is this aspect of these younger generation gods versus the older generation gods, and how the younger generation gods want to take over control of what's going on here in this reality in the realm of Earth. And yet you have this constant competition with a lot of the older generation gods who don't want to lose control. And I think that's been one of these secret wars that's been going on, and why humanity's been pulled so many different ways for so long. And like you said, you brought up a really good point about how Thoth mentioned so many times about how there's this window, just like the Mayans said, this window when we enter a time period when we go through our galactic center and our sun changes, where we have higher radiation and higher vibrational frequency. And we have this little window where we can ascend to a higher state of conscious awareness, and all of a sudden wake up and realize this game that we're in. And more importantly, just that, not only understand the reality that we're in and the components that make up it, but I mean, wrapping your head around the idea that there could be beings that have actually created a false reality here, and that we're trying to make believe that we're in a false reality. And what I mean by that is the idea that we're all alone here and we're constantly fighting against one another in this Darwinian survival aspect, and that we're just developed apes that have no outside influences, and everything you see in the world is simply a reflection of our primitive urges that are still being we're still undergoing and getting through. And I think that that's really how this paradigm shift has been created, to keep us locked in this state of not realizing that there actually are beings that have established and created the reality that we see all around us through the lowering of kingship in Sumer that continued all the way through the ancient world, where only certain bloodline kings and rulers were allowed to govern, because they were the ones who were either chosen or had the favor of doing the work for a lot of these beings, like you said. And so right now, let's think about this for a minute right now. We're in this time period, like the Mayans said, where after 2012, we reach what's called, like Thoth says, like Kukulkan's temple. Those are the different stages that represent at the top, which is universal consciousness. Mm-hmm. If we're in that window right now, it would make complete sense if you think of this return, the return of the sun gods, the return of the gods back into our reality. They would come back when we're in the window of waking up, because that would be the most jeopardizing time to them, when this whole game here would bust. When the people that were down there would realize that they're part of something that's keeping them enslaved in their own lower states of energy to work and just give all their energy towards means that are not about creating. And so here we are right now, where we're in that window where people are waking up all over the world. Truth is spreading at a rapid rate. It hasn't taken over 80% of the population, but it's taken over enough where people are really starting to talk about how there are things that we haven't really been told are right about history, about the universe, and about our reality itself. And so to me, it would make total sense that if there are things out there that they don't want us to see right now, around the sun, some of these strange anomalies, which I'm going to bring up in a second. But if that's true, it would make sense that if those things are there that you could see, something like like a solar observatory, that you would want to block off people from having access to see it. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I want to bring up in 2011, and then just September 11th, just a little less than a month ago, we had these strange anomalies that people were seeing around the sun. In 2011, people may remember it, and if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend going on YouTube and looking at some of these objective videos that show the sun and this object that seems to appear next to it, and then have some kind of a connection with energy where it's taking energy from the sun and then it just pulls away and disappears. And to me, that is impossible to try to explain through completely natural means of, some, explosion from the sun that created that, and we perceived it wrong or something like that. But what I want to get to is we just had something like that happen again, September 11th, where something very strange was seen around the sun. And I want to get back to what you were talking about. If we had this competition from some of these the Anunnaki, some of these beings long ago, who many of them may have left, if they're returning during this window of consciousness to regain control of our planet, it would make complete sense that number one, you're seeing all these closures of information, feeds that look at the sun. Number two, you're seeing this huge crackdown right now that just really started within the last year or two that is really cracking down on shutting all alternative theories down about truth to try to protect the narrative. The narrative that's been given here, which is essentially trying to mislead and block the truth of who these gods of ancient history really were, right, Gerald?
Pretty much. And, you know, I would say as a possibility that you're correct, the slaves would be waking up through a universal conscious event, triggering their latent circuits in their DNA, just like Timothy Leary wrote about and I wrote about in my book. I believe that's true, and I believe that's how we were designed to be at a window where no matter what happens, when you go through the galactic center here, you're either going to die or you're going to wake up and realize you're an eternal being of light having a meat experience.
Right. Thank you, Enki, right?
Right. So whoever did that and preserved that for us, we ought to have a big grin on our face, because had we did not have that, imagine how much longer our species could be enslaved. And listen, I think hybrids are used all over the galaxies to do the conquerors or the conquistadors work for them. You could call them colonizers, okay? They call them galactic colonizers.
Yeah.
They're after resources, okay? It's about resources. And if you watch Jupiter Ascending, there's a lot of truth in that movie, unfortunately. And who was Jupiter? It was Enlil. So is he saying in the movie through the industry that, hey, I'm ascending and blah, 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 and I'm going to
returning maybe?
Well, let's talk about that. The idea of returning, let's talk about it, them possibly never having left here, but also whether they have participation with the people that are watching the drama play. So whether they hide out in their temples and keep doing their thing, getting all their resources, or whether they have an interaction with the beings that they're, because listen, the best way to control is from secrecy, privacy.
Yeah.
As soon as they see you behind the wizard, behind the curtain, the game's kind of over, right? Well, that's what's happening right now, is we're pulling back the curtain. Every time we pull it back a little bit, we get a YouTube strike or some other crap, right?
Yeah.
Right, that's what it is. So no. We've all woken up for some reason, many of us, probably to the outside influence of the galactic center's energy change, right? If the sun changes, it's going to be changing us. Remember, it changes all life form.
Yeah.
Well, there have been people looking at the Schumann resonance and things like that, and what the spherical oscillator is doing as it's being exposed to different, things. And one of them is it used to be called the Enlil magnetosphere measurement system, but now it's called BATS R Us. It's the craziest thing, but it basically is looking at the Earth's sphere. It's looking at the energy fields around the Earth, and when the
electromagnetic sphere,
when it's fluctuating due to solar events, essentially looking at the correlation. And so I think that's really funny that at the very highest levels, I mean, who's watching the solar observatories? Who's measuring all this stuff? The colonizers that are here need to know that stuff, because it affects their mission. And we're all just the ones running the telescopes, getting them the information, blah, blah, blah. We're the disconnected little agents that don't know the whole story, right?
That's right.
And so the idea of them returning is more like them returning to consciousness because there's an event prompting it. And that is slaves that are aware that they're slaves don't like it. And it's not a natural thing in the galaxy to be a slave. So it brings up very deep questions about what the terminology of slavery is relative to an advanced species that has more capabilities than you do. How do you work with a species like that? And what's the relationship? If they've got something you want to know, you become their disciple and a student in the monastery, you learn it, right? If they want to know something from you, if they're already so capable that can snoop in with their telemetry systems from their remote outposts, they don't need to have an encounter with you. They can study us remotely. They can snoop on all our information channels, watch us on TV. What's that one doing over there? So you're in a telemetry meat modem, and people hate that term, but a modem just means you're modulating and demodulating data such that outside observers, listeners could snoop in or send you messages. So the idea that you're operating in this simulator all alone and you don't receive outside influences through the electromagnetic spectrum. Well, as soon as you know that, then you're going to put a foil hat on your head.
Yeah,
block them from getting you. So the less you know, the more susceptible you are to being a pawn.
Exactly. And I want to talk about Marduk again, and the whole connection to Lucifer, and the idea behind the fact that if you wanted to protect the truth, and you wanted to protect the truth specifically about the events of the past and a lot of what's influenced civilizations and things like that, the easiest thing to do would be distract people in a completely opposite direction so that they could be blinded from that. And you know, what that is largely modernized versions of religion. And that's the reason why I want to connect Marduk, because to
And
me,
culture.
besides what?
And culture in general.
Yeah. And to me, Enlil, Marduk, Ninurta, some of these big players, especially Marduk, and you mentioned a really good point, how we see when you look at Sumer, Babylon, and you look all the way through the Persian empires and all the way up through these civilizations that came out of the Fertile Crescent, you see this common connection back every time to the Anunna, these references back to these beings that, like Hammurabi, King Hammurabi in Babylon, he specifically mentions in the Code of Hammurabi, the largest cuneiform tablet ever written, specifically mentions that Anu and Bel, who Bel is Marduk,
that's right,
specifically mentions that they're the ones who chose him to be the leader so that he could rule over the people. And to me, I don't know how you could interpret that any differently. You just have to follow these names, like we were saying. So who is Marduk through all these ages? Well, he was Bel, he was Moloch, he was Amun-Ra in Egypt, and he has, I believe, and I think, and Gerald believes as well, that he played this role as Lucifer in the more modern aspects of religion, looking at Christianity, and this idea behind this morning star and this savior that has sacrificed himself here. And why has he sacrificed? Well, it's amazing, like, you know, when you learn that Marduk was the firstborn son of Enki, but because Enki was the half brother of Enlil, according to genealogy, it meant that Marduk could never become a ruler. And so to him, if you look at the records, it seems very apparent that all this sacrifice stuff that we see and all of these aspects of being on the cross, and I think a lot of it is connected back to him, and a lot of deceit revolving around the idea that he feels that it was his ultimate sacrifice being here in our reality, governing this place, because he could never ascend to become a ruler, a royal ruler of the Anunna. And I think a lot of that went into why he ended up playing very different dualistic roles at times. Whereas Amun-Ra, he was doing a lot of enlightening as the being Ra, but then you come back to other times when he was playing as, you know, Moloch in very strange sacrificial things like Bohemian Grove and a lot of these places. You can see that it's and looking at the whole Lucifer aspect, you can see that there's this really strange dualistic aspect where Marduk seems to be playing both sides, and maybe more or less a more malevolent side than a benevolent side, because I see a lot of the deceit and the deception that has gone into us being blinded by religion and blinded by a lot of these means being his doing. And so so today we look at like the Lucifer telescope looking up at the heavens, and we look at the idea of this return of the great God, right?
I want to interject something before
Go ahead.
Lose it there. Let's just do something kind of hardcore and collapse a bunch of information into a kind of a hardcore reality. Okay, you and I both know that Marduk was opposed to Thoth, and Thoth was the one who played the savior role, not Marduk.
Yes.
Okay, so the fact that he might be playing that role, listen, they played multiple roles as good actors and bad actors, and sometimes they could be both at the same time.
Especially Marduk.
Yeah, well, lots of them, right? So the idea that one actor is always good and always bad, that's not reality either, and it wasn't with them as well, right? So I want to collapse this idea that Marduk was Lucifer to a possible reality. He took over the Enuma Elish and put his name in as their home planet.
That's right.
Number one. And he called it Marduk when we know that wasn't the name of their home planet.
And he
Okay,
also said that he was part of creating humans, which he wasn't.
no, that's true as
He
well.
tried to take credit for that.
He doesn't seem to be good with the truth, is what you're saying, or at least fabricating the reality of what was. Okay, so number two was so that there was that. You brought up the idea that there was an organization at Bohemian Grove that worships Lucifer without question. Everybody knows they're Luciferian. There you go
Yeah.
to okay, but their statue there is Moloch, and
Yeah.
you and I both know that's Bel Marduk, right, from Babylon. Okay,
Yeah. And
so all
boom,
of a
there's your
sudden you've
connection, right?
connected Marduk with who they're worshiping is Lucifer. Period. You don't have to say anything else. It's a fact.
There he is, right there, right?
So the only possible problem with that is, can you prove that that statue is not Moloch and that Moloch is not Marduk? Well, the historical records point clearly to the pillars at where Palmyra, Syria, where they were doing the sacrifices to Bel Marduk, Moloch, right there. Okay, so now let's go to the next thing. Why are they doing a mock child sacrifice in front of this thing at Bohemian Grove? Whether
giant owl.
Let's just suppose that it was a mock thing. Okay, well, Bel Marduk used to do the real thing. Okay, go look in history. People were shown standing there with their kids offering up to this beast who would assimilate their firstborn, because that was what they had to do to be able to stay alive in his reality. That's what you did. You know?
Feeding him the life energy of young, human beings, right?
Well, see, this is where it gets even crazier. Is that we know the Anunnaki are affiliated with other races, that their DNA requires supplication from one of the products of their colonized planet, and that happens to be human blood. Okay, so there's a direct connection there. That okay, so now you ask about Pizzagate and all that, and all connected through those organizations that point right back to Bohemian Grove. Well, now you see why, because they're operating under the Babylonian Talmud that predicates that kind of behavior. And that tells me right there a lot about what's going on with Marduk, okay?
That's right.
He's taken over, as the Babylonian Talmud god, he's taken over Israel. Israel's taken over America, and they're doing these rituals on his behalf. And if he's going to be Lucifer, you can go look in Isaiah and read about the only place where he's mentioned in there. It was put in as the Latin Vulgate. It wasn't even in the original. Okay, this was, I believe, Enlil trying to smear Marduk. Okay, because
we should talk about that too. After.
Yeah. So anyway, they go back and forth. So, but it could be the case that they're in some sort of dark alliance, because one is smoting the other one, and so back and forth between these zodiacal eras, they seem to have term limits, and sometimes they cooperate in alliances, and sometimes they don't. Go back and watch the movie Jupiter Ascending again. See those crazy familial little alliances and trickeries that were going on to try to ascend to the place where I own that planet. Those are my resources. Well, it's just like what happens in a smaller microcosm in everyday life here, right?
Yeah, and can I bring something up really quick about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to talk about what you just said. You were talking about how there's a balancing of the zodiacal time periods. So if you have Pisces was a very negative zodiacal period, but should it have been? And that's a question a lot of people ask me. And when you look back at the different zodiacal time periods, the last two that have occurred, okay, I think based on the research that I've done, and I would love to get your feedback after, because we've actually never talked about this, but it seems to me that the reason why Pisces became negative and why there's such a dominance of Lucifer and Marduk in this whole, the birth of this savior, this Christ savior, I see it as, because Marduk is technically on Enki's side, the more positive side of duality of these rulers, that he stole the time period of Pisces to then, like you said, I think there was a dark alliance that was formed, even though Enlil and Marduk had been competing back and forth over and over again. They formed some kind of a dark alliance where they'd agreed upon that Pisces, even though, because he took control of it, it was supposed to be the positive duality zodiacal time period. He essentially tricked a lot of the other Anunna into having it be another negative polarity again. So you have two negative polarity.
So instead of fighting for the boardwalk piece on Monopoly game, they're fighting over the zodiacal rulership house or title on the earth, basically.
That's right. And I think, but they're based on their rules that they established. because we had two negative zodiacal time periods, they have to have a positive one next. That's why Aquarius has always been reined in, and so many of these ancient writings talk about how there's this great awakening that's going to happen in Aquarius, because no matter what, there has to be a positive polarity during that time, because that's what the energy is. That's what the next balancing act is going to be. And that's why there's such a clampdown right now on both truth and, like you see in all these movies, you see this idea of making some of these Anunnaki characters like Thor and a lot of these other ones who are very negative and in some ways evil, making them into pretending that they're the heroes. Whereas these other ones, like the idea of the Satan figure, Enki being this evil serpent, having them look like they're the evil ones and have these heroes be the heroes of our new time coming up. Because to me, when the truth does come out, whatever means are going to occur in the future, where people finally realize what some of these beings are playing the roles of, they of course are going to want to have the public think that the heroes are the heroes and not the villains. And so it makes total sense that right now it's this information war in our reality to try to create the idea that some of these, Yahweh, Enlil, the same being that played these roles, Abraham, they're this very benevolent hero of humanity, whereas it's the complete opposite. It's this competition over how we're going to.
That's where the irony is. That's where the irony is really when you wake up. So you got to have so if you make the truth the opposite of what it is in the reality, then when the characters figure it out, because we're in a dualism, right? It's either true or it's false. So and they've made it so obvious that when you reach universal consciousness at this point, this has to be what's happening, Matt. I can't put my finger on it, but the idea that there's ancient astronauts that were from a different, reality that are controlling your reality to use you as a slave. Well, you can look all over the earth and see if that's true. Whoever it is doing it. You can call it the evil bankers of the Illuminati or blah, blah, blah. Well, who do you think owns them?
Yeah, exactly. They're just puppets, right?
Absolutely just puppets. They're allowed to live, like the agent did in the dark agent in the Matrix, who turned on him and decided to join Agent Smith and to, come out of the truth and back into the lie. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. So right now, this is the most important time. A lot of people say, well, what is it? I've heard this countless times. What's the point of me spending all my time to try to acquire knowledge to just seem like I'm smarter than other people? What is that going to accomplish? Well, what it accomplishes is we are in a very narrow window where both the internet and the availability of social networking to connect to others has allowed the truth. If you can decipher through all the inversion and a lot of the things that are holding it back, you can find out things that you would never be able to find out in another life. So this window we're in right now, like Gerald and I just said, is incredibly important that we take some of our time, not all of it, but some of our time to understand reality and what's really going on, because we may not get this window again. And more importantly, what happens in this window with the amount of people that actually learn and reach a higher state of awareness, that transitions and manipulate and affects others around us, and can have this domino effect, this slow momentum that can't be stopped. And I think that's what's happening right now when you look all around the world at these means that are in place. To look at all these discoveries under Egypt right now, towards the halls of Amenti and all these underground tunnels that are then they pop up in the news. Oh, look at this tunnel that's here, but we're not going to tell you where it goes, or we're going to say that it doesn't really go anywhere and it's not important. A lot of these truths and these ancient history aspects are coming to light right now, and they're just scrambling to try to figure out how to hold on to the old narrative, how to keep this old paradigm going, right?
Yeah, but I think it's too late. I think the old narrative has come apart. It's coming apart at the seams, but still the people that are willing to be in the matrix for a paycheck, they're not going to change. And it's not really our job to wake them up. If they're entertained by that, go have your steak and your red wine and try to be on American Idol and be famous like the character out of the Matrix, right? That's what that was symbolic of. So it's, but they know, and they've chosen not to seek the knowledge when they decide to entertain themselves. So it's not that the knowledge is not there. And I think there are windows where it has to be made available, I mean, look at the ability to spread information today versus 200 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, you needed a printing press and somebody that would carry it from A to B and all that. Well, now all of a sudden it's instantaneous. So the idea that lots of people are getting access to it and choosing to know shouldn't be a surprise.
I agree. I guess it comes down to what do we decide to do in this lifetime? Because it could have huge ramifications for where we go in the future. Because I think a lot of the Anuna, a lot of these beings have the complete capacity to see what's coming. You know, see what's coming based on technology and their understanding of human consciousness and energy. And so it's the storm that they're just trying to figure out how to get through without having the truth, you know, totally come up. And I think, like you said, it really is amazing that we've had so many things that have been averted in our reality. We've had so many things that have been turned backwards, and so many ways where, you know, through religion and other means where we've been confused about what's real. And that stuff is starting to fall apart, but it's all being done for the means of keeping this going as long as possible. Right. And what I want to go into next, Gerald, to end out here, the last topic we have is I want to discuss about the nature of our reality and the fact that you've been playing around with the mechanics of games and looking into the rules that how you develop them, and getting back into how all of a sudden when you look at our reality and the rules and constructs that go into our reality, how they correlate, and how you can really see the fact that we're living in a holographic reality that has really defined laws and rules, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to understand that your situational awareness is based on your sensor fusion, your ability to sense what's in your environment and fuse a picture that you form in your mind as a concept. Yeah. Whether it's real or not doesn't matter, okay? We know that playing certain games and being exposed to, you know, high-tech LCD monitors and stuff with the right sound and effects, you can stir the same response in a human as if they're having the real experience, right?
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, okay, so let's play the game. Let's go back to Hunger Games. They were able to instantiate or spawn an enemy animal into their reality that they had an encounter with. That's just magic, right? The movie magic. Well, let's think about that. If something can exist at a wavelength that you can't see, we know there are frequencies that exist at cycles that go beyond the human hearing. So what do we have? 150 hertz maximum for human hearing or something like that? 0 to 150 hertz or 150 kilohertz. I can't remember what it is. It's not very high. Okay, but if something existed just outside that, your sensor can't hear it. Well, if something exists right outside of the wavelength that your eyes are sensitive to see, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay, so the idea that you're already in a skewed perception, okay, whether somebody's playing with that as a reality game with you is another matter, but you're already realize that a cat can see in the dark and I can't. Well, all these other animals have capabilities relative to their sensors that I don't have. So they have a different experience of that holographic reality based on their sensor fusion that's been designed into them. Okay, and if you've not even been designed, let's think about this, Matt. We haven't been designed such that our structures adapt to gravity correctly. We haven't been designed such that our skin can tolerate the radiation coming from our sun. We haven't been designed such that our eyes have the ability to tolerate that sunlight. Even looking up it directly, it's too much for us.
Yeah.
Burn your eyes. So all of a sudden you go, well, I'm not really, as an actor in this game, I'm actually not really capable as a material actor except for the reflective consciousness, the intelligence. That's the real weapon that I have that's really great, is the intelligence. You don't have any weapons on your hands like a bear or anything else. You know, you're a naked ape.
Yeah.
A simulated reality that doesn't even have a way that can survive on this planet. If you throw a naked ape out in the wilderness today, and they even have a reality TV show on this, right? How long can you survive? You know, with pretending you were a naked ape. Well, it's awful. It's terrible because we're not designed for that.
That's not what we are exactly.
No. So, so asking the question about what's our reality that can be perceived is limited to our sensors. And I would tell you something kind of profound at this point. The only way to perceive outside of the simulation to get to what's really true is not with your five senses. You can't. They've all been designed to be skewed because you're an actor in a hologram. Okay, so the idea of going beyond your perceived consciousness and finding an alternate consciousness, which means a brainwave change generally for you, for meat modems on this planet. Okay.
Yeah.
And for you to don't know, we're talking from about a half a hertz at delta all the way up to some say 20 hertz, some say 60 hertz for the waking consciousness for a human under delta, theta, alpha, and beta. So in their beta consciousness, that's where your Schumann resonance used to overlap approximately. But now it looks like, well, it's actually used to be at like 7.8 hertz. Well, that's the alpha state. Okay, that's where we know advanced learning and awareness happen. So what in our awareness, what in our reality put us into a brainwave state where we're having ADD? Essentially beyond 13 hertz, you're talking about attention deficit. Your brain's bouncing all around. You see what I'm saying? So you're a damage actor from word go just by your constructs in this game. And when you wake up to that, it reminds me of that story about it's a Native American story where one animal is comparing its capabilities with another animal in the play in the game of life. One of them can run fast and jump high and all this, and the other one's a turtle that can hardly move, right? Really slow and blah blah. And for us, when we wake up and realize that we don't have the perception to know that somebody could be in the same room with you if they could interact with light in a way that your eyes could be confused. I'm not talking about magic here. I'm talking about science. Look, we know about the ability to channel light through nanotechnology into structures that could replicate the background and make it look like you disappear or you can't be seen. You can do that today.
And it really begs the question when you start to look at it is, if it's that easy to manipulate in our senses because we're so limited, then it wouldn't be very difficult then to, let's just say, beings like the Anunnaki came here hundreds of thousands of years ago to create whatever kind of a construct reality they wanted based on creating the conditions that we would perceive reality through. So if you have, let's say you have, you raise two dogs, two puppies. One of them you raise through a life of complete violence and fighting. And you raise that other dog through love and spending time outside and running around. Those two dogs are going to end up very, very different on the other end. And I think that people should look through that, that viewpoint of our reality and just see all the different means from the bigger picture. From the bigger picture, like you said, don't just look at it with your eyes. Look at it within. Use your intuition and really feel what feels right. Because when you're going down this path and you're reading all of these ancient writings and you're starting to learn about what's really true, you start to feel what's right and what's not right. And so we start to feel that something's not right in this reality. People are spending all of their time slaving over making an invisible paycheck that then buys more stuff. And then they die. They're laying in their deathbed and they're dying and they're wondering what they actually did, what they actually accomplished in this life. And that's the whole point of this reality. It's a reality of distraction so that our energy can simply just be given up. And at the same time, the individuals won't wake up from the collective farm that they're living in essentially. But this is where I want to get to end on a really deep note. I think based on the fact that if you look at the harmony that exists all throughout nature and the harmony that exists everywhere in the universe and the balance that always has to be maintained eventually, and I use that word eventually, that means that if this holographic reality, this game of our existence here, if it's based on certain laws and rules, which I very much believe is, from the actual real being who really designed it, that some have called prime creator or God, which has nothing to do with the Anunnaki. They simply try to create their own reality here to play gods. But getting back to what I was saying, if there are laws and rules that are based on how this game should go, to me, when you look at nature and you look at harmony, you look at the energy of love, and you look at how if a species bases its life on lower vibration, hate, and war, they usually eventually destroy themselves. So to me right there, that's not where the design construct is supposed to go. That's a dead end. So what that means is that everything we see around us is ultimately based on free will, eventually has to go the way of reaching a higher state in growth and love and harmony, because that's the construct that is based behind how all of this will go. But again, because of free will, and because you can't tamper with how events go, you can't just swoop in and decide to change something. Instead, like you said, there's this inevitable future that always will happen based on higher states of energy. So it's quite beautiful, isn't it? That no matter what affects us and what keeps us down, no matter what happens, we will always reach a higher, unless we destroy ourselves, we'll always reach a higher state eventually and wake up from this entrapment, because that's how the game's been designed anyway.
That's right.
The real game, right?
That's right. And it's really a head trip when it reminds me of that movie, The Bourne Identity. So you have a sleeping actor that is doing the will of others, okay? And all of a sudden they get a bump on the head, and now they're aware that they were a sleeping actor. And it gives you these choices in deciding now what your mission's going to be. And this is an important time for people that are waking up to that. And the only thing I would say, without sounding like a parent, but this is what I told my kids, is in this game, yes, there are laws and rules and things you're trying to do, some of which you hope are going to have a lasting consequence, not a short-term reality and accumulation of a digital virtual coin or a piece of property that just goes away with the next hurricane or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That you're really looking for character qualities that are building your infinite energy aspects with immutable personality traits that almost all the real heroes have had, self-sacrifice and love and courage and all those kind of things. So that's why you see so much of that in the movies, I think, is because of those attributes are what's permanent in the game, whereas all this other stuff's a distraction. So the more, I think there was a movie, I can't remember which one it was. It might have actually been The Matrix #2, where they went into a bar on the way to trying to find the train or the train master or whatever. And they were, all of a sudden they realized they were having such a good time that they were so entertained by the situation that almost they couldn't extract themselves, right?
Because they got pulled into the illusion, right?
Right. So this is what culture is. It pulls you into the distraction of the illusion and if you don't break away from that and decide that you're not going to allow culture to influence your senses, you got a pretty limited chance of finding out what's really going on.
And you become very isolated because you force yourself to separate from that mentality of where everyone is just going to the mall, going to the movies, going to a bar. And when you do that, you get viewed as something's wrong with you. You're crazy. Look at that person. What happened to them? I don't know. They used to be normal, right?
They used to be normal when they would get along and do what the taskmasters wanted them to do instead of what they wanted to do. So I was going to tell you, ultimately, I found that if you can find whatever you're passionate about, that doesn't mean it's going to be static. It could be changing one to the other. Whatever you're passionate about, and you share it such that it empowers the human community. That's all you have to do in this life.
Yeah,
that's it.
I agree. It's
the most impactful thing you can do in the dialogue is leave.
We all have.
No, go ahead.
We all have special gifts, and we all have unique abilities that most just never pursue because they never get encouraged in the right way, or they don't have time. And like you said, every one of us can contribute something towards this collective of humanity, but yet most are distracted or don't think that they have anything to contribute. But I think we need to, rather than just necessarily feeling like we have to just spread the truth to every single individual, if some aren't ready, we can at least just encourage them to follow their passions, like you said, and that may lead them towards a different path in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not saying anything to change anybody's life, but we're having a dialogue and discussing stuff. And if somebody's snooping in by watching it from the outside as a passive actor, and they realize it's speaking to them, great. If it's not, that's not. That's how it is. That's how it is in this life. That's part of the finding your passion and sharing.
That's right. And I want to just bring up one last thing. So one of the reasons why Gerald and I haven't done a show in a long time is, as I've mentioned in previous shows, I'm finishing the newest book, which is called The Stage of Time. And one of the big aspects of that, this stage is coming right directly from the famous quote that Shakespeare had, where, you know, we're all playing different roles and we're all in this theater of life. And what you mentioned was very important towards that, because one of the things I talk about is how a lot of us here, and this isn't any kind of a negative connotation at all, it's just an observation. A lot of us here play these very specific roles. But most importantly, those roles can change at any time because of free will when we want them to. So I like to think of it if you think of everything like on a movie set, right? This theater of life. You have all these extras everywhere. The people that are just passing by, you know, those are the people that do their job, they go home, they watch TV, they go to bed. It's not a bad thing. They're not actually doing something that's going to leave this long-term impact of using their creativity. And that's what that means. Now, those people that are doing that to try to change things now, sacrificing their time, this difficult road, they're the heroes of the story. They're the ones that are trying to make a difference. And then, of course, you have the villains, or those who are playing the negative role, and they're the ones that are causing others harm or taking away from the potential of their creativity. And so one of the things that I want to strongly mention is that I mentioned in the book is that at any time, any individual who's an extra can become a hero and a villain, depending on if they decide to or not. But what that takes is their own awareness that they actually can make an impact on what's happening right now or what's happening on those around them to be able to become defined. So I think I encourage everybody so we can end out here, Gerald, I encourage everybody to look at their lives and not feel obligated to do anything in particular, but to just at least try to see if they can impact others around them in a very positive way. Because on a looking at a macro level, all of that has a huge ability in the future to change and affect how we end up as a human species.
It seems like recently I was reading, carrying that point forward, that there seems to be some truth behind the inheritance of behavior from a populace that's been exposed to it. Even rats, they can train them to do a certain thing, and then even the offspring seem to genetically inherit that behavior. Well, yes. I think that could very well be the case for humans as well. So one of the other roles is to, you know, be a good role model for other people, see how you live your life, how you're going to do this avatar game, because they're going to watch and see that more so than they're going to pay attention to what comes out of your mouth.
Yeah, that's the generational thing to carry on. What can you leave to pass on to influence others in a positive way? I completely agree. Gerald, I think that's a great place for us to end up on a really positive note. I just want to say thank you. It's always an absolute pleasure to have conversations with a great professor. And I just want to say thank you for coming on. I hope we can do this again soon.
Okay, buddy. Well, it sounds like you had a lot on your mind, so we might just have to. Okay, well, let's
I guess
close it there. And for all you Seven Planet broadcaster fans that are watching, I'll probably put it up someplace where you can see it. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
After that, we'll talk later. Okay, bye.